Now, at the top of the show, we told you about a story, trust me, that if you haven't heard a lot about, you will in the coming days. And it comes out of Brooklyn. And once again, it's got the NYPD facing criticism. Another amateur video capturing yet another cop getting rough with a person on the street. This time, it's a 43-year-old woman who was 5 months pregnant, standing all of 5 feet 4 inches. The video shows her being thrown to the ground on her stomach. Police say that she was interfering with the arrest of her 17-year-old son, who police say had a knife on his waistband. She suffered vaginal bleeding and still has bruises from Saturday's incident. Her husband was also arrested for trying to pull an officer off of his son while he reportedly was being beaten. All right, I want to get to our legal panel right now. Got a bunch of different issues I want to get into, but we'll get into the news first. Jimmy Kasouras, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, lecturing at New York Law School and also visiting professor at the University of Birmingham in England. Doug Von Oist, founding partner of Karsten Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct and selected by the Legal 500, one of the most influential trial attorneys in the nation. Mayo Bartlett, attorney and former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And I'm going to start with you, Mayo. You yourself were involved in a lot of also civil rights cases, also cases where there's questionable use of police force. If police are trying to effectuate an arrest, is it, and I'm not trying to be cute here, but is it black and white where the rules start and stop? Or if somebody's interfering with the arrest, whether it's a 5'4" pregnant woman or a 350-pound, 6'5" guy, are they allowed to use whatever force they deem necessary to be able to secure the situation and effectuate that arrest?
It can't be whatever force they deem necessary. It's got to be a reasonable amount of force, if at all. And you have to look at a use of force continuum, which begins with the officer's mere presence, and then it goes from there to verbal commands, if necessary, possibly a light hands application, which would be you directing a person someplace or away from someplace. And then from there you go to non-lethal force. You could use a slapper or a baton, things along those lines.
But if a cop turns around and says, hey, Mayo, hey, prosecutor, I've got a kid on the ground here with a knife on his waistband. I got a dangerous situation, dead of night. I'm in a neighborhood. I'm hearing a lot of screaming going on. Someone's coming at me. I'm not going to decipher if she's heavyset, if she's pregnant, if she's young, if she's 43. I have to make split-second decisions. What's the answer then?
Well, I think that that's where you have the benefit of video. Sometimes now, you know, again, if it's in a vacuum, we really don't know what that officer's perceiving, and that's why it's important that people in the community understand, you know, what's acceptable, because you could have the best intentions and not be a threat. If that officer doesn't see you, you can get hurt, but it may not be maliciously. On the other hand, once you make the assessment, hey, this is this 5'4" pregnant woman, and I've got 7 other officers here, somebody can effectively deal with her without throwing her to the ground. And when she's on the ground, you don't need to kick that person. So sometimes the officers go way beyond where it needs to be, but other times, you know, we put ourselves in a position where things happen that shouldn't happen.
Doug, it seems, whether it's this case, whether it's the case, the Garner case in Staten Island, a lot of cases in between, so much of this comes down to discretion. And I think for a lot of us that, and you guys have been on both sides of this, prosecutors and defense attorneys right now, the general public just wants clear lines. It's not that easy, is it?
It's not that easy, and that's exactly why we have trials, and that's exactly why we have trials by jury. And that discretion that you're talking about, when that discretion goes too far and there's a violation of a person's rights or somebody gets hurt, that's when we ask a jury to observe what happened, listen to the facts, listen to the witnesses, and make a decision whether this person went too far.
You know, Jimmy, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. The Garner case obviously has both Mayor de Blasio and Commissioner Bratton answering questions. And this also was born out of the whole idea of broken windows and stop and frisk, quality of life policing that previous administrations had put in place and were carried over. All that said, is what happened in Saturday, is that going to impact what happens with Garner or what happens? It's the same precinct house, by the way. You had the guy that was captured on video, one of the cops kicking a street vendor on 5th Avenue in broad daylight. That officer was suspended, but he's from the same precinct house as the cops who are involved in this Saturday night incident. How much of this is standalone and how much all funnels into the broader narrative?
I think it all is going to funnel into the broader narrative, and I think it's going to continue to raise public perception I think it's going to raise public negative perception for the NYPD. But what I hope it raises from Commissioner Bratton and from our mayor is Mayo talked about a continuum of force. What we need is a continuum of training. We need a continuum of training where these officers are trained, constantly reminded, look, they're under a lot of pressure. They don't have an easy job. You're absolutely right. They're on the job. A situation is unfolding. With constant training, with reinforced training, they're going to be able to take a breath before they act precipitously.
And I'm just thinking, guys, because we're going to hit a break, do you imagine us talking about this case, the Garner case, that case Fifth Avenue, 10 years ago when people all didn't have camera phones on them?
It's essential that you got to have the camera.
It's changed everything, hasn't it?
But we're still not having the same conversation that we had with Ray Rice. So when we have this officer, nobody's out there. I don't see any one of the domestic violence groups out there right now calling for this guy's resignation or calling for the commissioner to fire this person. So there's no zero tolerance here.
I knew,
and we've got to start looking at it.
You knew it was coming back.
But you got to look at it.
Yeah.
You know, we need to really address that.
You did.
All right. Well, we come back here. Speaking of NFL players getting yanked off the field following arrests, the question, though, remains, I kind of, sort of know where the NFL policy on this is, even though they're evolving it. If you get charged with something, forget about indicted, forget about convicted, they're pulling you off the field. You may get your paychecks, but what about other professions? How about a judge? This isn't just a hypothetical. We'll talk about that. What if it's a teacher? What if it's a lawyer? What if it's a sanitation worker? What are our lines now in the post-Ray Rice world here in terms of what's acceptable, what's not to keep employment while an investigation continues? Stay with us.